I think we need to consider how peculiar our circumstances are in terms of what we're up against. Psychologists are familiar with something called the victimization mindset. That is a race neutral concept. It's something that happens to human beings in all cultures. And the victimization mindset is one that exaggerates the degree of one's victimhood. It's most common among people who are not victims in any sense that most people would think. It's an elite, it's often an advantaged way of thinking. But you exaggerate your victimhood. The person who is under the victimization mindset tends to downplay even the obvious victimization of other people. And the person under the influence of the victimization mindset walks around constantly offended at their victimization not being sufficiently acknowledged. This is a kind of person. This is not a schoolyard taunt. This is the way that a modern human being might wind up. What we're seeing with the way race is discussed in America, especially among elites who then have a disproportionate influence on people who are not elites, is the victimization mindset institutionalized. What we're seeing is a particular way of being treated as a norm rather than as an aberration. And so what you have is a sometimes tacit and sometimes explicit idea that, for example, what gives you a challenge makes you weaker rather than what gives you a challenge makes you stronger. There is a tacit or sometimes not tacit idea that the world is divided between good and bad people, and that you're supposed to think along those lines. There's a tacit or sometimes not tacit idea that you're supposed to always trust your feelings. What I'm doing here is I'm recapitulating the tenets that Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt list in their really underread and underacknowledged book, The Coddling of the American Mind. And those three tenets are things that no normal person would instruct in their children, but which we're taught are somehow an important watch cry for groups of people and how we are to view groups of people. It's the institutionalization of that. And one thing that I think gets missed is how comfortable the victimization mindset is if you're not a victim. People choose this because it's a way of feeling good in the world. It's not people who are trying to seek power. That's only a small minority of the people in question. It feels good to pretend to be a victim in modern society. I've seen this all of my life. I wouldn't have known what vocabulary to put to it. But even back when I was a grad student at Stanford, this is 1990, May, the undergraduates responded to what anybody would have thought of as a very minor series of discrepancies. Black and Latino and Native American undergraduates in particular. And they chose it as an opportunity to take over the faculty administrative building, and a lot of them were put into a bus and taken downtown and arrested, et cetera. And I was much less interested in this sort of thing back then because I was trying to get a PhD in a subject that had nothing to do with race issues. But I remember watching this conflagration because I didn't have anything to do that afternoon. And the thing that struck me was that the students being taken away to jail in the bus, none of them really spent any time there, but they're being taken away, the local news is there, is that they were all smiling. And I thought, if this is serious, why are they making all those faces? Why are they joyous? And then some of them were editorialists for the paper, the campus paper, and the next day, a week after, they were writing joyous editorials. And I thought, they're imitating what happened here in the 50s and 60s. But if you look at the black and white newsreels of Dr. King in Birmingham, no one is smiling. So why the joy? And it was the joy because they were adopting the victimization complex, and because they were affluent and fortunate kids, black though they were happy. And you see this again and again. You fast forward. I was a young professor at UC Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley, and there was a conference thrown by the African American Studies Department when it became a PhD program. And there were people from all over the Bay Area, and there was, frankly, I wouldn't have said it out loud at the time, rampant, brilliant, articulate, and shameless exaggeration of the race situation in the United States in 1995. And even then, and I'm getting a little older, but I hadn't really spoken out yet, I noticed everybody here is so happy. Everybody here is so warm. There's a sense of warm fellowship in this room as people talk about their supposed victimhood. Now I know what that was. Any psychologist would know what it was. It's the victimization mindset, an aberration, having been adopted as a norm. And the thing is, this is quite unprecedented, I'm sure, in human relations. And by human, I mean Homo sapiens. I mean 300,000 years of this species. Has there ever been any society, any people, anywhere, and I don't just mean last week, I mean over the past 300,000 years, where the disadvantaged group wallows in victimhood even as it's passing? It's very peculiar, and yet the people in question are good people. They're not bad. They don't deserve to be made fun of, but you just wonder, why would anyone do this? And I think it's contingency. It's chance. We have to always leave room for the fortuitous in our sense of how social history goes. There are always things that are just because. If that asteroid hadn't hit 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs would have become more sophisticated and mammals wouldn't have become big and we wouldn't be here. If you look at an old cartoon character, often they're wearing gloves. Why? Why does Bugs Bunny wear gloves? The reason that Bugs Bunny wears gloves is because early cartoon characters were based on minstrel stage performers who often wore gloves. That's why Mickey Mouse wears gloves. Why doesn't he just have hands? Chance is the way these things go. In this, I think that the victimization mindset has become so popular, partly because of the vast success in America and beyond in prescribing racism, so that you have a dominant class who are ready to embrace and support people who are taking the victimization mindset too far by acknowledging that they understand what racism is. And then I think we've seen what's really happened lately because of the peculiarity of social media. That story has not been written yet. We're still living it, but in 2009, everything changed. It wasn't so much 2020 as 2009. That's becoming a distant time, but 2009 was the year where it went from what's Twitter to, oh, you're not on Twitter. It was also that year that your mother was on Facebook, that year, 2009. And next thing you know, social media is everywhere, and I live in it myself. But that means that an aberration of this kind, especially if it's so attractive, if it gives you such a feeling of warmth and belonging, can spread faster and matter than it would have had any way to do otherwise. It used to be that you would have had to read a magazine article. That's not going to have the effect of articulate and ongoing tweets in particular. And so we're dealing with something extremely unprecedented, extremely peculiar. And in order to get past it, there are all sorts of suggestions that we can discuss. But I think that we have to understand that so often what we're dealing with is not the way it has to be. And so the cartoon characters don't have to have gloves. Black America and beyond doesn't have to wallow in victimhood idly in the way that it does. And our academic culture and our activist culture, there's another way that it could be. I see no reason why academia has to be so focused on documenting racism and racist inequities and submitting all of that to chi-square analysis, as opposed to studying something which I would think all thinking people would be equally interested in, which is, how have people gotten ahead amidst the challenges of a stratified and economically unjust society? How have people gotten beyond it, and how might we bring that to scale? That is surely as worthy an academic project as chronicling once again how things aren't fair. It stuns me in a way that people with PhDs aren't sloveringly interested in that question and wanting to share it with the world. Too often, that sort of thing, at least in the United States, is shared in wonderful books, such as by Ian Rowe, who must be here, or there was a wonderful one written, unfortunately, it was actually in 2009 by Bill Cosby, and now, well, so we can't use his book, Come On People, anymore. But there are these books that actually outline how you can get beyond the injustices. And they don't get enough attention, partly because they're not seen as having the imprimatur of people who lead the academic culture. That's not fair, but that's just the unfairness that there will always be. Our thinking class must concentrate more on sharing how people have gotten beyond the worst, because that's the way human beings have worked throughout the history of the species. So that's what I have to add to this.